I never believed the stories until I saw it with my own eyes. But it all started with Assa, the most beautiful girl from our village, and the wealthy man she decided to marry. A marriage that seemed like a dream but quickly turned into a nightmare. Assa was a girl with big dreams. She was born in a small village where life was simple, but she always wanted more. We were close growing up together, playing in the dusty streets and dreaming about the future. She often talked about the city, about the life she wanted to live. She wanted to wear fine clothes, live in a big house, and eat food we'd only heard about in stories. So when she turned 18, she packed her things and left for the city, determined to make her dreams come true. Life in the city wasn't easy for Assa. She worked hard, doing all kinds of jobs to survive. Sometimes she would send messages to her family and me, telling us she was doing fine, but I knew she was struggling. The city could be harsh, especially for someone like Assa, who was used to the slow, predictable life of the village. But Assa was strong, and she never gave up. Years passed, and we didn't hear much from her, until one day, she returned to the village, out of the blue, with news that shocked us all. She was getting married, and not just to anyone, but to a wealthy man she had met in the city, a man who promised her everything she had never dreamed of. When she spoke about him, there was excitement in her voice, but also something else, something that didn't sit right with me. You see, Assa was never the kind of person to be impressed by wealth alone. She wanted love, happiness, and someone who cared for her. But the way she talked about this man, it was as if she was trying to convince herself, more than anyone else, that she was making the right choice. I remember asking her about him, about who he was, and where he came from, but she avoided my questions. She just kept saying he was a good man, a rich man, and that was enough. The wedding day came faster than any of us expected. The whole village was buzzing with excitement. Weddings were rare in our village, and everyone was eager to see Assa, who had always been the pride of our community. She had been in the city for so long that many of the younger ones didn't even know her, but her return was like a breath of fresh air, a reminder of what we had lost. Assa looked stunning on her wedding day. She wore a beautiful white dress made from lace that shimmered in the sunlight. Her skin was as smooth and dark as polished ebony, and her eyes were as bright as the stars. There was something in her eyes that unsettled me, a sadness, a fear that she couldn't hide no matter how much she smiled. Then the groom arrived. I'll never forget the moment he stepped out of that big black car. The entire village went silent. He was tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen, and he wore a white agbada that was so fine, it almost looked like it was made of silver. His face was smooth, too smooth like it had been polished, and his eyes were the strangest part. They were cold, empty as if there was nothing behind them. He didn't speak much during the ceremony. He just stood there, holding Assa's hand, his grip tight enough that I could see her wings. The whole time, he kept that same smile on his face, but it never reached his eyes. It was as if he was smiling for show, but deep inside, there was something dark, something terrifying. The ceremony was quick, and soon it was time for the feast. In our village, weddings are a time of joy, of celebration, and this one was no different. There was music, food, dancing, everything you'd expect. But despite the festivities, there was an unease in the air. No one could quite put their finger on it, but it was there, like a shadow, hanging over the celebration. Then, in the middle of the feast, it happened. I was sitting not far from the bride and groom when I noticed something strange. The groom, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly tilted his head back, and I saw something white and wriggling fall from under his cap. At first, I thought it was just a piece of cloth or something, but then more of it started to fall, I looked closer and my heart froze. Maggots, they were coming from his head, crawling down his neck and onto his shoulders. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as I realized what I was seeing. But what was even more terrifying was that the man didn't seem to notice. He just sat there staring straight ahead as if nothing was wrong. But there was something very wrong. People around us started to notice. There were gasps, murmurs, and then someone screamed. The man reached up, touched his head, and looked at his hand, now covered in maggots. But instead of reacting like any normal person would, he simply looked at his hand, then turned to Assa with that same cold, empty smile. Assa was standing next to him, her face pale with fear. She looked like she was about to faint. She tried to step back, but the man grabbed her wrist, his grip so tight that it looked like he was hurting her. She let out a small cry, more of a whimper, really as tears started to roll down her cheek. "If you leave, you will never have peace," the man whispered to her, his voice low and airy. I was close enough to hear those words, and they sent chills down my spine. Assa's tears flowed faster, but she didn't try to pull away again. She just stood there, trembling as the man leaned closer, still holding her wrist, maggots still falling from his head, his shoulders, and onto the ground. No one knew what to do. The entire village was frozen in place. Unable to move, unable to speak, it was as if we were all trapped in a nightmare. Unable to wake up, the music had stopped, the laughter was gone, and the only sound were Assa's quiet sobs and the wind whispering through the trees. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The man let go of Assa's wrist and turned away, walking back to his car. With each step he took, more maggot fell from his head, leaving a trail on the ground. He got into the car, closed the door, and drove away without looking back. Assa was left standing alone in the middle of the square, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking. That night, Assa did not go home. She left the village, and no one saw her again. Some say she went back to the city, trying to escape whatever curse had come upon her. Others say she ran away, far away, hoping to find peace somewhere else. But deep down, we all knew the truth. She would never find peace. After Assa disappeared that night, the village was left in a state of shock. Everyone had their own theories about what had happened, but no one could agree on the truth. The image of the rich man with maggots on his head was burnt into our memories, and Assa's sudden departure only deepened the mystery. Some said she had gone mad, others whispered that she had been taken by dark forces, but none of us could shake the feelings that something was terribly wrong. I couldn't stop thinking about Assa. I knew her better than anyone, and I couldn't accept that she would just leave without a word. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had to find her, to understand what had happened, and bring her back if I could. So I made up my mind to go to the city and look for her. The city was overwhelming. I had never seen anything like it. So many people, so much noise, and everything moving so fast. It was easy to feel lost, but I had a purpose. I started asking around, showing people a picture of Assa, hoping someone would recognize her. For days, I wandered the streets, going from one neighborhood to another, but no one seemed to know anything. Then, finally, a breakthrough. I met a woman who worked at a small shop in one of the busier parts of the city. When I showed her Assa's picture, she hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I've seen her," she said. "She came by here a few times, asking about work." My heart leaped with hope. "Do you know where she is now?" The woman shook her head. "I haven't seen her in a while. Last I heard, she was staying with a man, an older man, wealthy, from what I've heard, but people say strange things about him." My heart sank. It had to be the same man from the wedding, the one with the maggots. I asked the woman if she knew where this man lived, and after some hesitation, she gave me an address in a part of the city I hadn't been to yet. It was far from the busy, crowded street I had been wandering. in a quieter, more isolated area. When I arrived at the address, I was struck by how different it was from the rest of the city. The house was large and well maintained, but there was something airy about it. The windows were all covered, and there was no sign of life inside. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I forced myself to approach the front door and knock. There was no answer at first, but I could hear movement inside. I knocked again, louder this time, and after what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open. A man stood in the doorway, but it wasn't the groom I remembered from the wedding. This man was older, with grey hair and a wary expression. He looked at me with suspicion. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough. "I'm looking for Assa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I heard she might be here." The man's expression changed, his eyes narrowing as if he was sizing me up. For a moment, I thought he was going to shut the door in my face, but then he stepped aside. "Come in," he said, his voice low and serious. I stepped into the house, my heart pounding in my chest. The inside was just as strange as the outside. Everything was in perfect order, almost too perfect, as if no one actually lived there. The man led me down a hallway to a door at the end. He opened it slowly, and I saw Assa sitting on a bed in the corner of the room, her back to the door. "Assa," I called out, rushing to her side. She turned to face me, and my heart broke at the sight of her. She looked exhausted, her eyes dull and lifeless, her skin pale and her hair unkempt. But she was alive, and that was all that mattered. "What happened?" I asked, taking her hand. "Why did you leave the village? We've all been so worried about you." Assa looked at me with tired eyes, then glanced at the man standing in the doorway. He was watching us closely, his expression unreadable. "I had to leave," she said quietly. "I couldn't stay there after what happened." "But why?" I pressed. "What did that man do to you?" Assa shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "It's not what you think. He didn't hurt me, but I made mistake, a terrible mistake." I glanced back at the man who was still watching us. I could feel the weight of his gaze, and I knew there was more to the story than Assa was letting on. "What mistake?" I asked gently. "You can tell me." Assa took a deep breath, her hands trembling in mine. "I married him because I was desperate. I thought I could have a better life, that I could escape the struggles I faced in the city, but I didn't know who he really was or what he was involved in." I frowned, trying to make sense of her words. "What do you mean?" "The man I married, he's not just rich," Assa continued, her voice shaking. "He's connected to powerful people who do terrible things. I didn't realize it at first, but after the wedding, I started to notice things. Strange visitors, meeting at odd hours, whispers about deals that sounded dangerous. I was trapped in a world I didn't understand, and I knew I couldn't go back to the village. It was too risky." I stared at Assa, trying to process what she was saying. "Why didn't you tell anyone? We could have helped you." Assa shook her head again. "No one could have helped me. The people he's involved with, they are dangerous. They have eyes and ears everywhere. If I had tried to leave, they would have found me. And if I went back to the village, I would have put everyone in danger. So I stayed, hoping I could find a way out." I glanced at the man in the doorway. "Is he one of them?" Assa looked over at him, then back at me. "No, he's not like the others. He's been helping me, trying to protect me from them, but there's only so much he can do." The man finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "She's telling the truth. She got caught up in something she never should have been a part of. I've been trying to keep her safe, but it's not easy. They are always watching, always waiting." I felt a surge of anger. "So what do? We can't just leave her here." The man sighed, rubbing his temples. There's only one way out of this. She needs to disappear completely, to leave this life behind and start fresh somewhere else. But it's risky, and it means cutting ties with everyone she knows, including you. Assa looked at me, her eyes pleading. I don't want to leave you all behind, but it's the only way. If I stay, they will find me, and they will hurt anyone who tries to help me. I felt a lump in my throat. There has to be another way. There isn't, the man said firmly. I've seen what these people can do. The only way to keep her safe is to make sure they can never find her again. I looked at Assa, my heart breaking. I knew she was right, but the thought of never seeing her again was almost too much to bear. If you leave, will you be okay? I asked, my voice trembling. Assa nodded, though I could see the fear in her eyes. I'll be okay. I have to be. I wanted to argue, to find a way to keep her in my life, but I knew deep down that this was the only way to keep her safe. I reached out and hugged her tightly, tears streaming down my face. Please be safe, I whispered. I will, she whispered back, holding me close. I promise. I stayed with her for a little while longer, just holding her, trying to memorize every detail of her face. Then with a heavy heart, I said goodbye. The man promised to take care of everything, to make sure Assa got out safely and started a new life, far away from the city and the dangers that haunted her. I left the house that day, knowing I might never see her again, but I also knew that she was doing what she had to do to survive. As I walked away, I tried to hold on to the hope that she would find peace and happiness somewhere, even if it meant we had to live separate lives. When I returned to the village, I didn't tell anyone the full story. I couldn't. It was too dangerous, and I had to protect Assa's secret. I simply said that she had found a new life in the city, and that we wouldn't be seeing her again. It was a hard truth for everyone to accept, but it was the only way to keep her safe. As the years passed, Assa's memories began to fade from the minds of the villagers, but I never forgot. I kept her in my heart, hoping that wherever she was, she had found the happiness and safety she deserved. And I learned a hard lesson. Sometimes, the dreams we chase can lead us into dark and dangerous places, and the price of those dreams can be far higher than we ever imagined. Please like and subscribe for more.